Hey guys, in this video I am just going to be drawing out a portrait. So I already kind of drew out this little like background lines thing. And now I'm going to be using a colored pencil, which is not my favorite because you can't really erase it, but I feel like it shows up better in a video than a normal pencil does. And I don't have my charcoal pencils here. So I'm just going to be starting out kind of sketching a loose portrait, just really loosely from a photo of myself, although my goal is not to have it really look much like me. So kind of same as always, my first couple marks, I'm just like figuring out where in the overall piece I want my portrait to sit. So how high up, how wide, how big, how small. Like always, I want to keep my first few marks like just really light. I'm just kind of figuring out, it's almost kind of like an intuitive feel thing. Like, okay, I'm just like putting some marks down on the canvas so I get a feel for how much space I'm going to have, where everything's going to go. Just kind of getting a sense of it. So once I have a couple marks down, then I usually kind of start with doing like the shape of the eye sockets and the cheekbones. So when I'm trying to figure out where those are gonna go, this is like really kind of at the very beginning is when you want to take the most time and kind of step back from your work as much as possible. I don't really do it in the videos or when I'm teaching classes because, you know, it's kind of boring for people to spend 10 minutes watching you stare at a painting. But you really do want to take your time because the first kind of few marks where you decide to put everything, that influences your overall proportion. So those are kind of really important steps, even though at the beginning it's kind of when you're the most confused and have like the least idea where everything's going. But it really is when you want to kind of take the most time. So for the eye sockets, as I've talked about before in kind of anatomy videos, I'm basically drawing from the top of the brow bone where your eyebrow is to the top of your cheekbone, kind of to the inside of the bridge of the nose, and the outside of that brow bone. So it really helped me when I was learning to kind of touch my face and like physically feel those bones and the shape of those bones. So if you were looking at a skull, I'm drawing basically where the eye socket is on a skull, and that just helps me kind of figure out the overall proportions of the face. I find I'm basically drawing from the bones to the muscles to the little like fleshy bits last. Okay, so I'm just really kind of loosely drawing out. Eye sockets give me the overall kind of size and shape of the face, and then here I'm just drawing a bit of those cheekbones. And from there, drawing a bit of the nose. Again, with these, I'm not trying to get actual shapes. I'm trying to get the size and where they are in the overall face. So it doesn't matter what it looks like, if the shape's right. It just basically matters how large it is and where it is in the face, like how everything relates to each other. So then going from there down to the mouth. So for this part, like, it doesn't even matter kind of what shape the lips are or anything. What I want to kind of figure out is basically how far down. So like if this is the ball of the nose, then from there's to the top of the lips, there's to the midline of the lips, bit of a space because the mouth's going to be a bit open, then to the bottom of the lip, then to the indent above the chin, and then the chin itself. So it's kind of like I'm almost like working myself down with like little measurements, even though I'm not really measuring anything. And I'm keeping all of my marks at this point really light because I do want to be able to change them later if I need to. I won't really be able to erase any of these, and that's fine. I don't really erase too much when I'm just working on a sketch anyways. Mostly it's kind of, if these lines are light enough that it doesn't really matter if they're there. I can have a bunch of these random lines. I just don't want to go in really heavily, especially with something like charcoal, and then your entire page is covered in these really dark marks, and it gets really hard to see what you're actually doing. I got my non-alcoholic mojito, because drinking and drawing never mix well, for me at least. Okay, so got a bit of sense of the cheekbones, kind of a bit of how wide the mouth is. As I've talked about in other videos, it's really good to kind of do a couple little like measurements with your eyes, or even like if you have a photo in front of yourself, like measuring with the pencil, just kind of being like, okay, how wide is the nose? And from there, how wide is the mouth? Is the mouth going past the edges of the nose? Of course, if the face is front on, like straight on, it will. But if you have like a face that's at a bit of an angle or something, it can really help to kind of do little measurements, being like, okay, on this side, the edge of the mouth ends exactly below the nose, and on this side, it doesn't. And so doing those kind of little measurements can help you check. Especially if you feel like something is wrong, but you can't figure out what exactly it is, that can kind of help. One thing people ask me a lot about is how you get like emotion and expressions and stuff. And maybe one day I'll do like a separate video on it. But one of the little things that I look for a lot is like the way that the muscles change when our faces show expressions. So one of the things that I like to do a lot is, if you make, like, it helps if you look at your own face in a mirror and kind of feel the muscles as they move. But one of the ones that tends to move a lot when we have emotions is these ones right above our eyebrows, those muscles there. And you tend to get kind of this light area and a shadow right there. So those are kind of little things that I like to look for. And you don't want to overdo it, because when you overdo things, they tend to look caricature-ish and cheesy, but it's like little subtle things that I kind of like to look for. So when I do kind of the top of the cheekbone here, this is going to end up, it helps me figure out the proportions, but this will actually end up being kind of like a bit of a shadow too. You can do a bit of a shadow beneath the eye and kind of along the top of that cheekbone. So then when I'm starting to draw the eye, I have this eye socket, so I know approximately where it's going to go. But it also kind of helps to be like, okay, so here's the edge of the nose, the edge of that cheek. That goes to this indent, and then that means the bottom of the eye is about there. Just kind of doing little checks to help you. And then I don't always do it, but it helps me sometimes to have like the actual eyeball inside the eye socket. And this isn't the like whites of the eyes that you see. This is the actual eyeball. So that means it goes from the kind of top of the eyelid, and then your eyelid cuts across there, and that ends up being the crease. Or not everyone has a crease there, but for people who have a crease, that ends up being the crease. And the bottom of the eyelid ends up being the crease on the bottom, which again, not everyone has, but can help to look for. So again, just drawing really light, really loose shapes. And I'm trying to make my marks kind of show the shape of the areas I'm drawing. So for example here, this brow bone is kind of a rounded shape, so I'm putting in like a bit of a mark there. Same thing with here. This area here is kind of rounded, so I'm making sure that the lines, I don't need to necessarily draw like a circle there, but that the lines kind of reflect that, and that's what helps make it look more alive, is having that kind of roundedness to it. So one of the things that people sometimes struggle with is getting kind of the spacing between the eyes right. That can definitely be kind of challenging, because it's something that even if it's slightly off, it kind of really shows a lot. It's something that our eyes really pick up on and notice. So one of the things you can do is kind of the same thing that I was talking about before. Go like doing little spaces between things. So going from the inside corner of the eye, there's a bit of a light area, and then there's a shadow. And then from there, there's a bit of an in-between area to about there. And then there's light on the bridge until there's shadow. So dark shadow here, a little bit of light, dark shadow, light inside of the eye. This one is particularly complicated because there's like a lot of little areas of different levels of shadow. But it's one of those things that can help me kind of be like, okay, how much space is there really between these? Like looking for those little areas so I make sure I leave enough space for them. And just in general, it tends to be more flattering to have the eyes further apart as opposed to too close together. So I try to break everything down into pretty geometrical shapes, and basically one of the biggest challenges is just kind of trying to simplify the face down as much as possible. You want to make the shapes kind of easy and manageable for yourself, and it can always get kind of more complex later on as you go, but it's good to have a simple place to start. Simplifying them so that you can kind of get things down on the canvas, and then as you get more sure of where they go and the proportions and that everything's correct, then you can get more complex and add more detail in. So for the lips, again, I'm just trying to simplify the shapes as much as possible while still looking for kind of little details. As always, I kind of want my lines to be kind of curving outwards so everything feels kind of round and full. And for the middle line, I want to avoid kind of having a really simple line that's just like, oh, that's the lip, like a straight line. I want to have, okay, so it kind of curves downwards a little bit at the end of the mouth and then kind of curves underneath this lip. And then underneath the middle part, underneath there, and again that kind of curving downward shadow on the outside edge there. So while I want to keep everything as simple as possible right now, I can still look for those tiny little details. So what I want to avoid is drawing like a ton of things and a ton of details and getting lost in it all. I want to make really simple, clear lines for myself to follow, but still have them kind of show shapes. I want the shapes to be complex but simple at the same time. So I want them to show kind of the curves and the roundness of the body and of all the body parts, but I don't want them to be trying to capture every tiny little detail. So I'll figure out the hair and all that kind of later. But for the outside lines of the face, again, I want to keep it really simple and clear. I just kind of want to get the proportions right. So one of the things I look for is from the outside of the eye, how far is it to the outside of the face? Probably about there. I still want to have the shapes kind of go around the cheekbones, they go in below it, then outwards around the jaw, inwards, then around, curving around the chin, outwards around that jaw, in, then out again around that cheekbone. So simple, but kind of reflecting the curves in the anatomy of the skull beneath it. And then all the other stuff, all the hair, stuff like that is more something that I will figure out once I start painting it. Alright, so next video is going to be painting the portrait.